Hello, everybody. Now, everybody should be able to see the screen. We're going to talk about the schedule. Okay. Today we're doing vitality, health, and disease. Turns out I'm going to be gone. The week of February 27th through March 27th, that whole month, I'm going to have to be out of town for the whole month. So what we're going to do is we're going to move the 3 astrology labs down here to the bottom. April 10th, 17th. We're going to move them to April. Now, and then Christopher's going to do tarot labs. And then when I get back, we're going to pick up on the astrology labs. So this is the new schedule. So we'll do vitality, health, disease today, and then we'll do friends and lovers when I get back on the 10th, and business, finances, vocational selection. Then we'll do a little bit with progressions and transits. And we may revisit the vitality, health, and disease a little bit with some charts where we can look at progress constants, which is a little beyond the scope of this thing. Now, basically what we're doing today is we're doing vitality, health, and disease, although we're going to do some preliminary things. Now, last week, remember we went through the aspect grid and we did a couple of them. Now, I did, normally what you would do when you do these aspects is you would start with the sun. You would go through these in order. And I think almost everybody knows that. And there's great benefit from doing that, by the way. Because as you go through it, you do see all the aspects. And, we used to have a chart like this where, we did all this manually. And, of course, the whole manual process, by the time you got through filling all this out, you had a really good feel for the chart. These days, we do something like with horoscope. We'll bring up an aspect grid or any planet. And of course, it already has computed all the aspects for you. And by the way, I'm going to click this little button right here to expand this. And it also gives you the amount of power of each aspect, so you can quickly see which are the most powerful aspects, and the harmony and discord. So there's 2 numbers in each aspect grid. The other thing that we didn't do last week that I just want to mention is talk about parallels. They are also important. If we review the declinations, planets that are in the same degree of either north or south. For example, here the sun and the moon are parallel because one's 23 degrees north and one's 23 degrees south. So if they're in the same degree, either both north, both south, or one north and one south, then that's what fills out the other part of that grid. But there are lots of tricks to computing aspects. First of all, you have to know what all the degrees are. Okay? And then you have to have kind of a feel, if you're looking at your chart, for the orbs for the chart. But remember, one of the tricks, you need to know the triplicities and the quadruplicities, because that helps you figure out the aspects. When you look at a planet that's very close to the cusp of a sign, it gets more difficult. But a planet that's just a little over Gemini and into Cancer might be sextile to it. In this case, it'd be like 5 degrees, so it might not be. But you have to watch that too. I want to mention one other thing, just so you know that it exists. If you actually take the time to go through and manually do the aspects in a chart, which is very handy, the two hardest to do are semi-square and sesqui-square. Okay? But there's a trick to doing it, how you do it. And I'll show you what that is. Mercury's at about 9 degrees, we'll round off. So the way to instantly see all the semi-squares and sesqui-squares to Mercury in the chart is to move one sign ahead. So instead of 9 Cancer, it would be 9 Leo. And then add 15 degrees, because a semi-square is 45 degrees, which is a sign and a half. So we add a sign and then we add a half a sign. So the half a sign we get by adding 15 degrees to 9, that'd be 24 degrees. And then moving ahead a whole sign, 24 degrees Cancer, and then a whole sign would be 24 Leo. So here's the trick. You know a planet that's at 24 Leo is semi-square Mercury. But what that tells you is that any planet in a fixed sign is going to be semi-square or sesqui-square. So all you got to do is look at the fixed signs. You just go around the chart looking for something close to 24 degrees. Here's 26 degrees. Here's Mars at 26 degrees Leo, so we know it's semi-square Mercury. And we look for something else around 24 degrees of a fixed sign, and this is why you have to know your fixed, mutable, and all that sort of stuff. And we see up here that the MC is at 24 degrees of a fixed sign Taurus, so it's going to be semi-square. And if there were something at 24 Scorpio or 24 Aquarius, the other fixed signs, then we know those would be sesqui-square. So that way you can go around the chart, bingo, you can pick out the semi-squares and sesqui-squares. That's a trick I invented. Probably somebody else did too. It is really handy. Okay, one other thing I want to look at before we get into health and vitality is I want to look at Trump's chart real quick, and I want to show you astrodynes. When you get a chart report, you can have the astrodyne summary, which gives you the societies, the trinities, the triplicities, and the quadruplicities. Here they're called elements and qualities. And it gives you the total power in each one. So remember that last week we went through and counted all the planets that were in fire signs, earth signs, air signs, and water signs. And we decided that most of the planets were in fire and air. And sure enough, you can see that most of the astrodynes are in those two things. We also went and looked, we could see that most of the astrodynes are in the wealth trinity. You know, it's great to do the count, but you can also go look. The beauty of astrodynes is that you can count planets. That was our old way of doing it, like we did. Okay, but some planets are more powerful than the others. So the nice thing about the horoscope program is it computes the power. And you can see he's got a lot of power in the public houses there. It computes the actual power that in this distribution, these distributions, which can give you sometimes a lot finer analysis than just counting the planets, because some planets are a lot more powerful than others. I'm talking about vitality, health, and disease. It's important to talk about some theory. And the Brotherhood of Light teachings, the Zane's teachings, are that the astral body is thought-built, okay? And that the natal chart is a map of that astral body. The theory is that it's thought-built from all the experiences, emotions, and thoughts that it's experienced through prior forms. And that those have accumulated and built up this thought body at the time of birth, and that the planets approximately map that structure of the astral body when the soul is born into physical form. Now, you have to take into account that an astrological chart is a two-dimensional representation of at least a five-dimensional body, because we live in 4 dimensions. So the astral plane has got at least one more dimension beyond that. So we're talking about a 5-dimensional form that gets mapped into a 2D chart. Okay? So it's difficult, of course. You can get a lot out of the astrological natal chart, but it's not perfect. Also, these thought cells and thought structures that build up the astral body they get grouped together into complex thought structures. But the basic thought cells themselves are built up. They actually have an atomic-like structure. And by atomic, we mean the basic parts that make them up. And you can study that by reading in Course 9 Mental Alchemy. It goes over that structure of how the basic drive for significance gets polarized into two, a positive and a negative expression, which is the reproductive desire and the nutritive desire. And those three things then are the sub-elements that comprise a thought cell. So they get combined in different proportions to make up different kinds of thought cells. So now, the health of these thought cells and structures obviously has a great deal to do with the health, both physical and mental health, of the physical body. And the physical body maps to the extent that the physical materials are available, maps that astral body. The numerous methods that we have for harmonizing discordant thought cell structures. And remember, part of the thing we talked about a couple of weeks ago was in any chart reading you do for anybody, you can't just tell them what's good and what's bad. You've got to tell them how they can best take advantage of the good and how they can ameliorate the bad, either through conversion, mental antidotes, manipulating the environment, or other means. Okay, now, moving on. The planets in the natal chart map to the 10 most dynamic thought cell structures in the astral body. And these correspond to the most significant urges that have built up through the evolution of the soul. And they're mapped by the 10 planets. For example, the sun relates to the power urges. So those thought cells are built up and greatly affects the drive for significance. Those thought cells are built up from things which relate to, for example, influence the vitality, the significance, and the authority, or anything related to vitality and significance and authority, experiences and emotions and thoughts affect the sun. Those affect that dynamic thought cell structure mapped by the sun. Same, the moon rules the domestic urges. So things which affect the mental attitude, the domestic life, and everyday affairs. Those things all things relating to those things have built that complex thought cell structure. Mercury are the intellectual thought cells, and so the mental interest, the facility and accuracy of expression, and cerebral activity are what happens when those thought cells are stimulated and experiences relating to them built up those thought cell structures, the intellectual urges. Venus rules the social urges. Mars rules the aggressive urges. Jupiter, the religious urges. Saturn, the safety urges. Uranus, the individualistic urges. So with Uranus, sudden events in the life, things that happen through human agency and that bring change, and those things which help an organism to adapt to sudden change and to come up with new ideas and new things, all spring from those individualistic urges, and those individualistic urges, those thought cells are built up by those experiences. Neptune, imagination, sensitivity, and schemes. And then finally, Pluto relates to the universal welfare urges. And those thought cells deal with association with groups, subtle force, cooperation, and coercion. Now, the coercion comes from group pressure, usually. But the things that were the most prominent one in 1930 when Pluto was discovered were gangs, racketeering, kidnapping. Kidnapping was big. So that's extreme coercion. All those things were in the news a lot then. And so it was believed that Pluto ruled those things. Then there's 12 zones. The 12 zones in the astral body are mapped by the 12 signs. Where Aries rules the head, Pisces rules the feet. And if we look at those, I'm not going to go over this in detail, but obviously anything in Aries can affect the head, the face, the upper jaw, cerebrum, upper hemisphere of the brain. Taurus, the neck. And I won't read all of these, but Gemini is basically the arms and the hands and the lungs. Although Cancer is the lower part of the lungs, breast, diaphragm, and stomach. The Leo is the spine, back, and heart. Virgo is the abdominal and umbilical region and the intestines. Libra rules the kidneys, ovaries, and in general the internal generative organs. Scorpio is all the things that, the prostate, the rectum, bladder, and the external generative organs, the sex organs, and it seems to respond to the nose. So you can often tell Scorpios, people who have strong Scorpio, by their nose. I've noticed it. They have sort of an eagle kind of a nose, kind of a beak. And Capricorn, the knees, Aquarius, the legs below the knees and the ankles, and finally Pisces, the feet. So, and then finally there's 12 compartments in the astral body, and you guys know those as the houses. And I've got all those listed here. We're not going to go through all these right now, but the main thing that we're doing here is we're talking about the structure of the astral body, because when you're talking about disease, vitality, and health, you have to understand the theory behind it. A good theory is one that explains all the facts. It doesn't have to be proven to be a theory. You can have a scientific theory, and it's called a theory because it's not necessarily proven, but it does explain all the facts. And that's one of the beauties of Zane's, how he lays all this out, is that it's a good theory because it seems to explain the facts that we've seen, including paranormal activity. The aspects to the planets, of course, is what adds power to planets. Besides being in angular or succeeding houses, the aspects add power. And by the way, the MC and the ascendant are particular stellar structures that are important. The ascendant represents a ground wire. It's the place where the astral body is grounded through the electromagnetic body to the physical body. So anything that aspects the ascendant has direct access to the physical body. Whereas the MC doesn't really relate to health at all. It relates to publicity, because any aspect, any planet that aspects the MC gets broadcast to the whole world. So the more numerous the aspects, the more powerful those group of thought cells. And harmony or discord of the aspects to a particular planet are the main thing that determine its harmony or discord. Now, we do have malefics and benefics. We've got Venus and Jupiter, which is minor and major benefic, and then Mars and Saturn, of course, are the minor and major malefic. But those can be even made harmonious with good aspects. So the harmony and discord of the aspects, and here we're talking about semi-squares, squares, sesqui-squares, opposition. Those are discordant aspects. Whereas semisextile, sextile, and trine are harmonious aspects, and the rest of them are neutral. So what happens to discordant aspects is that whenever there's an aspect between two planets in the chart, that maps a stellar aerial between those two groups of thought cells. And just as the length of an aerial or an antenna in the physical world depends upon how well you can tune antennas to pick up certain frequencies. So when you have an antenna connected to a TV, we don't use them much anymore. But it was important that they had the right length so that they would pick up the signals harmoniously without static. The same thing applies to these aerials or antenna that are formed by aspects between two planets. They pick up energy either harmoniously or discordantly, depending upon how the aspect is tuned. And they can feed that harmonious or discordant energy down into the thought cells, and they make them feel happy or sad. These aspects can pick up more than just astrological energies. They can pick up character vibrations. So things in the environment can also cause activity. For example, the nature of other people's personalities can stimulate certain areas in the astral body. Certain kinds of stones, music, certain minerals, are known to be ruled by certain planets, so they will stimulate certain areas, certain planets in the astral body, or they relate to signs and they stimulate a sign. So if there's something in the environment, say that stimulates a sign of the zodiac, let's say Taurus, then what happens is it stimulates any planet that's in that part of the astral body. Okay, in this case it would be the neck region. So if you get a precious or semi-precious stone that is ruled by or vibrates to Taurus, and you wear it, then the theory is it'll stimulate the planet that's in Taurus. Say if you had a very harmonious planet in Taurus, then you'd want to, and I don't remember which stone or what things relate to Taurus, but that's the idea. And so the amount of activity of any particular group of thought cells is a combination of their natal power and then their progressed power and then any environmental influences that I just mentioned. And by character vibrations, I mean environmental influences. And we could switch them around there, but that's right. So, I mean, you have to understand your own natal chart. And you want to know all of the key aspects in a chart, in your chart, for example. You want to be able to write down exactly how that expresses in your life. And if you haven't done that, go do that, because it's quite a little exercise. You don't have to do every aspect, because a lot of them are minor. But the important aspects in your chart, you write down exactly how that expresses in your life. And if you don't know how, then that's a little exercise to go figure out how it does. Now, but progressed aspects then are the movement of the planets in the chart after birth as they make aspects to each other into the natal planets. They build temporary stellar aerials in the astral body between the 2 or 4 terminals that are involved in the progressed aspect and pick up energy in the environment and astrological energies and feed them down into those thought cells and stimulate those thought cells on the inner plane to attract events using their psychokinetic energy. And so it's not only the psychokinetic energy that's going on, but they're influencing you physically, and they may relate to health.
Hi.
Hi, Renee. You have a question?
Do you ever look for the health and vitality to see where Saturn is, Paul?
Well, okay, that's your question. Then, whatever house Saturn is in is going to, be subject to work, responsibility, and economy or loss. Okay, for sure. Okay, if it's in the house of friends, then You might not have very many friends. The ones you have might bring you a lot of work and responsibility. You might take care of them, or they're always whatever. Those are the kind of things to expect. Certainly, Saturn can have a big effect on the health, but it depends on where it is in the chart and what aspects it makes, particularly to the Sun, Moon, and Mercury. So let's go to the next chart here. Michael, did you have a question?
I just wanted to mention that, especially I think in regard to health and vitality, not only a discordant planet, but a weak planet, a planet that has some very great leading aspects because of its health position, can be something that can indicate a sort of health problem. So it's weakness as well, which is an interesting thing, I think. It's not only discord, but weak. Being a weak planet, not having many astrodynes.
That's
just think is one factor.
That's absolutely correct. That is the reason, for example, other than the sixth house, interpret the sixth house, because the sixth house relates to illness. But more generally, the conditions surrounding illness, not necessarily the fact that they're going to be sick. However, a planet in the sixth house tends to be weaker because it's the weakest house. So a discordant planet in the 10th house is better than a weak discordant planet in the 6th house because, as you said, it's a weak area in the astral body, and therefore there can be a tendency to illness.
The 6th house wouldn't be any weaker than any other cadent house, right?
Well, the 6th house is it is the weakest house. It's weak. Yeah, right. It's weak. Chart of house power. In fact, if you could find it in course 16, Stellar Healing, it'll give the exact amount of astrodynes that you get in a house, and they're different. The 1st and the 10th are more powerful than the 4th and the 7th, for example.
Okay.
And the 6th among cadent houses is the weakest of the cadent houses. And so Zane's gone, and through research that he's done, he's actually got the sort of variation in house power. Okay, so, and then of course, the closer you are to the cusp, the more power you get for that house. But the maximum you can get, say for the 6th house, is a much smaller amount than, say, for the 9th house.
So when you're looking at astrodynes, it factors in house position as well.
That's right. So when you're looking at the power of a planet in astrodynes, that power of that planet is a function of its house position, the house it's in, and how close it is to the cusp of that house, plus the power of all the aspects that are made to that planet. The sum of those is the total power for the planet. Okay, so, and another thing, any planet that's prominent in a chart can be a beneficial influence, source of talent, or a significator of disease if it's discordant. But by far the most important of the planets are the Sun and the Moon. The Sun rules the vital electric force, whereas the Moon rules the magnetic constitution. And you can think of them as sort of two poles of the electromagnetic body. Now, the metabolic processes of the body generate an electromagnetic field, not to mention the electrical activity that goes over the nerves that's ruled by Mercury. And that electromagnetic body is the agent of transmission between what's happening on the astral and the physical. Now, you have to take some care with extrapolating these terms. These are excellent terms for understanding the influence of the Sun as being the vital electric force of the chart, which is a positive force, whereas the Moon is a negative receptive terminal that affects mainly the magnetic constitution. And they're sort of like the two poles of a magnet that create this field, okay? And it's a very good way to talk about them, but but I just want to warn you, you can't, when you start talking about electromagnetic fields and electric forces and all this, you're dealing with physics. And so you don't want to get too far because you'll get outside of the realm of physics. And we're just trying to use, low velocity terms to describe a high velocity body. And it's, it's not a perfect match. That's all. Okay, so
the metabolic processes, and that's the interaction between those vital, electric, and magnetic.
right. Well, there's this whole electromagnetic body that's built up from all the activities of the cells and the nervous system. Any individual cell, those metabolic processes generate electric because they have charged particles. In fact, they work, by particles that go back and forth between membranes, right? That's how a lot of that stuff happens. And so, polarized particles are an important part. And polarized particles are what generate electric fields. And moving polarized particles generate magnetic fields. So, it all adds up together. Let's move on. Okay, the factors that are the most important in determining vitality, health, and disease are the moon. First of all, the moon, then the sun, then the first house and ascendant, and the sixth house. The moon is the most negative receptive terminal in the body, and it is the place where impressions from the environment, both the astral environment and to the extent that they get across that electromagnetic boundary from the physical environment. Both those is the easiest avenue for the person to receive impressions about the environment. And so all those things build up a terminal of this very receptive terminal that has a big influence on not only the unconscious mind, but the health, because it rules the magnetic constitution. Now, Zane says that, if you have a strong vital chart, meaning a powerful sun that makes lots of aspects, you can have a weak constitution and live a long time. But if you have a weak sun, sometimes even a strong constitution can be overcome by certain diseases. So, and he talks about how, some people have lots of little, go through a very long life with never being without some pain or suffering, every day. The moon maps this place where impressions enter the final form, and it also rules the constitutional magnetism. So aspects to it, its placement in the chart, are very important. The sun, to the extent that it's strong and harmonious, greatly helps length of life and rules the vitality of the person. So it's sort of the dynamic positive force that's acting that creates the other half of this electromagnetic body.
No, I only raised my hand. It was during the discussion of the relative house power. I, for some reason, it popped in my head that I think is also taking into account the fact that a house may be above or below the horizon or east or west.
Yes. Well, I think
Yeah.
it does.
Yeah,
Right, it's
yeah, you're right.
And where'd you say
We all
that
agree
chart
with you.
was? What?
Well, it's in stellar healing 16. There's a chart because in stellar healing is where you learn to do astrodynes. It's got all the explanation of how to do astrodynes. Part of which is you got to know house power for a planet. The first thing you do is calculate its house power, and then you start adding up all the aspects.
I see.
Shane,
Yes.
did you have a question?
I just want to know how about retrograde planets? How does that affect you or your health or your astral body? I have a lot of retrograde planets in my natal chart.
Oh, how to retrograde planets. Well, to my knowledge, retrograde planets don't impact health. I've never quite, myself, I really look at retrograde or direct. You know, what Zane says is that retrograde planets tend to be repressed. So it's kind of similar to planets that are in intercepted signs, because, which he says they tend to be latent tendencies. Well, repressed tendencies, I guess, are different, and why they're repressed, I don't know. But as far as I know, there's nothing relating to health. I'm going to so no, I don't think the retrograde planets would have any impact on your health, Shane.
I like to look at retrograde because the planet is apparently moving backward from our point of view on Earth, as though it advises us to be more yin, more receptive, more not trying to push the river so much as accommodate and adapt to what we're brought and given.
For retrograde planets?
Yeah. If that helps us take care of ourselves, follow guidance that we intuitively feel resonant with, etc. Instead of using the plow ahead mentality.
I mean, I find, the keyword repressed quite difficult sometimes to understand how that energy could be. But I think maybe, Christopher mentioned that where he saw the retrograde planets is that maybe they manifest their energy a little bit later in life or come to the fore later in life. I think that's kind of sort of resonates with me, that concept.
Renee, do you have a question?
Hi. Well, I just had a thought about the retrograde planets and the ones that are moving from being retrograde to direct and being stationary, because Zane did say a little bit about that being a very powerful position for the planet to be in. So I don't know if I've heard anyone mention that keyword latent, which is a much kinder word, and I really understand it.
You mean a weak area in your astral body, whatever sign's on the cusp of the 6? Is that what?
No, but your physical body. For instance, I have Taurus on the 6th house cusp, and that's definitely the weakest part of my body is my neck.
Okay, that's what I thought you said. Let me ask if anybody else has noticed. I'll say that I have Pisces on the cusp of my 6th house, and I have very sensitive feet.
He is extremely sensitive.
I mean, they're sensitive. I mean,
There you go.
and Vicki, you had your hand raised.
Yeah, with regard to the repressed planet,
Yeah.
my dominant planet is retrograde. And I have
That's
pondered
right.
that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And what I've observed about myself over time is that given that planet, it's really harmonious. It's up in the 10th house. I would have thought I would have gone out and really pursued a career and a public life.
Right.
And
Yes.
but I have had zero desire to do that.
Right. Yeah, I've often wondered about that too. That's a good. Vicky's dominant planet is up in the 10th house. It's Jupiter, and it's retrograde. And while she does get a lot of great press for all the great things she's done for the Church of Light in latter years, yeah, I always had the feeling that as harmonious as that is, and making all those, that you would have been great out in the business world.
Right.
You know,
And I have
you
a
had
great
that.
business sense.
You have a great business sense, and you got all those planets in the 6th house trying that Jupiter up there. But you never, it was just not, didn't happen, it wasn't
I just had no
there.
desire to do it.
Yeah, that's
And I
it.
had plenty of opportunity.
You see, in the old days, when they had an ephemeris, it would be marked as retrograde, and then it would go direct. But like in the Die Deutsche and I think in the American ephemerides, they never marked. They said stationary. I don't
Only if it's
remember.
that very day, right? You'd have to look up.
That's the whole point. Is
Yeah.
a plant, when you do a very detailed down to the second or tenth of a second of a degree of where a planet is and how fast does it ever stop moving? Well, actually, no. I mean, there's probably always some motion as it goes from retrograde to direct and vice versa. So at what point is it stationary? Well,
Yeah,
that's
hard.
you have to define that. I've
The
never
motion-
read any exact definition
Yeah.
of what stationary means.
Yeah, the planets move with differing degrees of forward motion. My moon, when I was born, was moving very fast.
Right.
And I thought, that's fascinating. And that would be true of any of the planets. You could tell if they were moving fast or slow.
Right, that's right.
That would be,
You bet the only thing I
Really?
look at is the ascendant, if the ascendant moves fast or slow. Of course, there's a table that gives the average motion of the planets. And you can go compare the motion of the planet on the day you were born over a 24-hour period with that table and see whether it's a fast planet or slow. And he actually does talk about planets which evolve, which those characteristics, if it's fast, especially the ascendant, things develop faster than if they're slow. Well, let's move on here. Okay, aspects to the moon can affect the mentality, and the receptivity and the magnetic constitution, so it has an effect on the health. And depending upon where the moon is in the chart, determines on the things that the impressions, the habitual mode of how a person receives those impressions into the unconscious mind of all the things that are happening around them. And aspects of certain planets mean that they're readily absorbed into the unconscious mind. Now, aspects of the sun are particularly important for length of life. For example, Zane says that a harmonious aspect of Jupiter to the sun and any aspect of Mars to the sun gives length of life. And but in general, the more powerful, more harmonious the aspects to the sun, then the longer the person tends to live, and the easier it is for them to overcome illness. Whereas aspects to the moon tend to indicate discordant aspects, difficulties in certain areas of the constitution, and which is different from vitality and being able to overcome disease. And then the next in importance is the first house in the ascendant. So any planet in the first house, first of all, it's the most powerful house, is going to have some impact on the health. Depending upon the aspects that it's made, whether it's discordant or harmonious, determines that impact on the health. Now, any planet that is particularly prominent in the chart, we'll talk about prominence here again, but planets, any planet that's powerful and makes a significant aspect to the sun or the moon is going to have an impact on health. So it's going to be good or bad. So you can be sure of that. And then, if there's a planet in the first house, it has conditions surrounding health because it affects the physical body and the nature of the physical body. So it has to do with health. So you really have to sort of balance all these factors. And finally, the sixth house. Those things, the sixth house has to do, having a planet in the sixth house, other than it might be weak, does not necessarily mean you're going to have illnesses. The sixth house relates more to the conditions surrounding illness, because it relates to illness, it relates to food, and it relates to food and assimilation of food in the body. And so that it's really the conditions surrounding illness is what planets in the 6th house typically denote. Okay? And if there were a lot of planets in the 6th house, you might think that somebody was going to have all kinds of different illnesses. But in fact, Vicky has how many planets in the 6th house? 4 planets in the 6th house. She's
Well,
pretty
you're
darn
very
healthy.
healthy.
And
She's
you're
very
a
healthy.
health conscious
And-
person.
And she's a very healthy. That's a good point
Yes,
too.
And she takes care of her diet.
That's a
and all
good
that.
point. All of that stuff, diet, and your thoughts about health and illness, and the 6th house also has to do with conditions surrounding illness. I mean, the environment that you get sick in, or that you deal with people who are sick, because it's not just you; it's other sick people. All those experiences in dealing with illness go into that compartment of the astral body, mapped by the 6th house. Renee.
What sign is on your 6th house cusp, and are all the planets in that same sign?
Mine are all in Leo.
Hers are all in Leo.
Sorry.
She's got Sun,
I have
Mercury, Saturn,
and
and
Pluto.
Pluto all in pretty close conjunction there in Leo in the 6th house. And then trine Jupiter in the 10th.
So your sun and your vitality, and they're all pretty harmonious.
Right, it's pretty
But
harmonious.
let's see, I forgot in what area of the body Leo is all of a sudden.
The heart.
Back and heart.
Heart, spine.
Heart. The spine, yeah.
The spine, yeah.
And how is yours, Vicky?
Well, I think they're okay. I'm 65, and
Right
so
on.
far so good. What sign is yours in, Michael?
Well, Leo's on the cusp of the 6th house as well, and well, I have had a bad back recently, but actually my back's been pretty good. Touch wood again. Yeah, I've had no problems, and I've been very lucky in that direction.
Leo is always been to be a very healthy sign, no matter what. I don't know.
Yeah, I think you're right on that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And typically the Sun, the Sun will map a vital area in the astral body if it's not afflicted. Now, the one thing I didn't mention here is Mercury. Zane considers Mercury also. There's really 5 factors here. Mercury is very important because Mercury rules the thoughts, has direct access to the nervous system, and the unconscious, particularly the unconscious mental activity ruled by the moon, is capable of being turned in a certain direction. And Mercury does that. So Mercury can channel your thinking into a certain direction. So it actually performs 2 functions. You can direct your thinking with it, which can be very helpful to keep from experiencing discordant thoughts and emotions. But it goes the other way too. So everything that you're thinking, that mental food feeds your astral body. So, it's important what you eat physically, and that mental food is also very important. So, well, we've got a few more minutes here. So I'm going to bring up, we've got Trump's chart here. We've got the power thing selected, so it's got them ruled by power. Prominence, the general rule is if it's in an angular house, or it makes good aspects to the sun or moon, it makes a planet prominent because it's going to have a big impact on your life, especially your health. Okay, well, let's just look at Trump's chart here.
Are we looking for help?
Yeah, health. So let's look at, first of all, let's look at the sun and the moon. Now, the sun and the moon are the 2 most powerful planets in his chart. So they're both strong. Now, moon is a little discordant in its opposition to the sun. course, we don't know what illnesses he's had. I don't know anything about that. Maybe we'll try and I'll try and look at that sometime. But I'd say with that strong and fairly reasonably harmonious sun, that his health would probably be pretty good. The other thing we
He's
can
also got Sun sextile Mars, isn't
Right.
it?
yes, the sun is sextile Mars.
So that
Sun and
that
Gemini.
bodes well for his vitality.
That bodes well for his vitality. It also bodes well for length of life. And look at this. He's got Sun trine Jupiter down here, too. So he's got a good aspect of Jupiter and any aspect of Mars.
What is that when Mars is a malefic?
Because,
It gives you spunk and fight,
Right.
and you know you're.
Even if it's tough.
it adds to that electric vitality, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Now, Zane gets that from the old Brother of Light Research Department, where they looked at hundreds and hundreds of charts, and they found that people who lived a long time often had either harmony. They found that discordant aspects of Jupiter to the Sun didn't add to it. They found that any aspect of Mars to the Sun correlated with long life, but only harmonious aspects of Jupiter. I guess discordant aspects of Jupiter brought, maybe overindulgence of some kind, or stuff that might, certainly impact the health. So he's got all the factors for being vital, having a long life. He's got a strong constitution. He's got a full moon, and that opposition is considered to be discordant. But it's so well drained, because certainly Mars, which has an impact on his health, it's the ruler of his personality. Mars in Leo is the ruling aspect of his personality, because of its close conjunction to the ascendant, and the fact that it drains that opposition between the sun and the moon, I guess, makes him pretty darn healthy. We're at the end of our session here, and I'd like to get comments from anybody. Renee's got her hand up. I'm going to unmute her. Renee?
Someone's health issues were with each chart, and then have the list of the 4 different health issues. And like they could just be anonymous, but maybe a few of us know of a chart that has a health issue, and then try and match them up.
Well, yeah, I'd love to do that. I think that would be great. And in our next class, if we had some charts, I tried to find some good charts. I just didn't have enough time to go through. When you're talking about health, in Course 16, Stellar Healing, it has all the natal and progressed constants for a whole bunch of diseases. I don't remember, but a pretty good slew of diseases. You're suggesting, Renee, that everybody try and find some charts of maybe somebody who's been sick or had a certain illness, and we can compare them with what the various natal and progressed constants are that predispose to that particular disease. Is that what you're saying? Okay, let me repeat what you said there earlier, or what I thought I heard you say, is that you were suggesting that you have to be careful telling somebody that they have a predisposition to a certain disease based on what they have in their chart.
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, when you do somebody's chart, I would agree that you wouldn't tell them that they had a predisposition to cancer or some other terrible disease. But certainly for discordant planets in their chart, you don't have to talk about disease, but you can go to Personal Alchemy, Course 21, and find out the best things to eat. And you can tell them how to use mental antidotes. And you can tell them actually quite a lot of things that they can use in their life without telling them that they have a predisposition to any particular disease, because really, you don't know. Zane says that before a disease occurs of a particular kind, you're supposed to have the natal constants and the progressed constants in effect for that disease, in addition to having progressed aspects of the first house and the sixth house. But I would agree with you with that. But you can tell them how to best harmonize that particular aspect of their chart and what to eat. Glenda.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
When people have progressed aspects that are hitting, it would be interesting to also talk a little bit about how to apply then those antidotes and conversions to those sorts of situations. Just some ideas about how to go about that process, because I think, as you said, we have a mental diet and a physical diet, and so that for me would be very interesting.
Right, that would be interesting. I think for some of the more serious diseases, you got to start early in life reconditioning those thought cells, because once you get something, then you got a real problem. I think we need a lot more research on this. Obviously genetics is another thing that plays here, and we don't understand exactly how the interplay between the astral body is mapped by the birth chart and genetics play out. Does the soul attract the body that's got a genetic predisposition and it's already in the chart, or do you have to take it? These things are pretty tricky. So, and anybody else out there who has a good chart that they know of somebody that has a particular disability or disease, why don't you send it to me? And then when we have our next class, is a ways from now, because it's not going to be until April 10th, then we can start off by looking at that. If there are no more questions and comments, I'm going to sign off. I've really enjoyed this. I'm so glad we got some good comments and everything. Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Anybody? Good night, everybody. It was great fun. It was great. I look forward to our next thing.